see in the toolbar at the top of the menu bar, it should say recording now.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, so yeah, just so that's we are now. And then what it does is it takes like the middle third of your screen and the middle third of my screen, and then it is a side by side and records the audio, and then you can just click to download it. There'll be a link in the chat with the download to the video. And then, so yeah, the thing that I'm hoping to do with this is talk to people who are active in the California independence movement, and just get a sense of like where they're at, you know, how they came to be a part of it, and what they see as, you know, issues of import. So I don't have any, you know, topics that I have to touch on. I just want to give people an opportunity to talk about what's important to them.
Okay.
So yeah, so I'm Brett Pike. This show does not have a name yet. It just goes on my YouTube and the Facebook. And I'm here today with Mike Beecher, who I met at a anti-Trump rally in Los Angeles last month. Mike is active with Independent California, and that I think is about all I know about Mike. So you'd like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mike Beecher, and I'm this guy who does things. No, I work with IC. We're working on an initiative right now to get undocumented people to have California be able to create its own citizenship so that we can have our own immigration policy. I'm also, I work with IC just doing general operations and stuff, media events like that. I do a lot of kind of strategic stuff, philosophical stuff like that. I have political theory, that type of thing.
Interesting. It's yeah, the immigration is something that is obviously a huge issue, and I think it's something where the political consensus within California is distinctly different from the political consensus in America. You know, I talked with Marcus about this a couple of weeks ago, and you know, he and I at least I think agree that Trump is legitimately the consensus of America. That's who they want, you know, in the executive. And one of the reasons why is because they want to build this wall. They want to have this you know, irrational immigration policy. And you know, in California, which is now white people are now no longer the majority in California since about 2014. It's a totally different dynamic, and it's kind of difficult to express how crazy Californians see Trump's policies as being. So I think it makes a lot of sense what you're describing for California to be able to, you know, I saw a while back that the state had issued the 1 millionth driver's license to an undocumented person. And I saw that and said, well, if they have a driver's license, they're not undocumented. You know, they're in the system at that point. They can, you know, participate in, you know, all kinds of stuff. But it sounds like what you're talking about goes a step further.
Well, I mean, there's essentially 2 points to that, which is this. Well, California is older than the United States. So, you know, it was Mexico, then it was independent, then it was part of the United States. Hopefully that can end. So we have a culture for that is different from the rest of the United States in the sense that Pennsylvania, immigration here is what we use to stabilize our underclass of people who are trying to come up and, you know, assert themselves in the system that we have, right? Pennsylvania doesn't have that. Michigan doesn't have that. I mean, they don't have the sheer volume of immigration. They just simply don't have the culture for it. They're not prepared to absorb these people. And that's where you get kind of Trump's immigration policy, which, I mean, they could be prepared. It would be a benefit to them, but they're not. So, and as for the 1 millionth driver's license and so on, yeah, that's just a fucking that's a fucking fraud. Essentially, that's what it boils down to. Is it's just a clear case of fraud and ripping people off, because you're absolutely right. They pay all the same taxes we do. They own property like we do. They do everything we get to do except vote on laws. It's sheer discrimination, and it's just about politically conveniently creating an underclass for so unions and wages and voting rights, but definitely want the taxes. So they get kind of a semi-legal status. It's like, you see what I mean? It's just a sham.
Yeah, there's this kind of the American dream is this idea of unlimited social mobility, and the idea that anybody with hard work and grit and gumption can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and rise out of poverty. But the reality is that the wealth structure that we have kind of requires a permanent underclass, and I think it's increasingly clear that that's not working for a larger and larger fraction of the population.
Well, let me put it this way. It works for us as long as we keep immigrating people, because that's where we get that underclass. If you look at the birth statistics, what generally tends to happen is as families become more middle class and, above middle class, the birth rates precipitously decline. So where you get the replacement value for that population to keep having an expanding population with a declining birth rate, that only equals one thing, and that's immigration. And that's what we do. That's how we maintain our population in California, which is also why we're accustomed to absorbing immigrant populations. We're very, very, very good at absorbing immigrant populations, and we shouldn't stop. Pennsylvania, not so much. They're comfortable with a declining birth rate or trying to stimulate their birth rate to maintain their population. So, it's semi-true. It's not so much that we always have an underclass, but the point is that the people in that underclass are constantly they arrive, they go through a process. They arrive, they get a job, they make some money, they reinvest, they find themselves in a better socioeconomic position, they move up the chain. All right, then and so on as more and new immigrants come and replace them as they rise. Right. And that's a workable system. The dilemma here is that it stops at citizenship. You understand? It stops at the power to vote. You have to wait a generation for your children to be citizen before you can actually have any legal precedent or power. And it's kind of a scam, if to put it bluntly. You get what I mean? In other words, if you believe in if you believe in this kind of manifest destiny, the cream rises to the top, so to speak, then you want those people to have rights as fast as humanly possible so that the cream can rise. The idea that someone should be kept in some kind of a narrow quasi state so that there's a readily available workforce, or to prevent them from voting in mass because that skews the demographics, is just lazy.
Yeah, that's it's an excellent point. I think of democracy as being a system that measures the political consensus that exists among a disparate population. And I think that one of the things we're seeing in America is that system it doesn't scale linearly forever. Having 300 million people all concentrating that entire consensus into a single executive it's just not working. But I think in California, there's a size with 40 million people where you can have a consensus. It's a more workable democratic unit, if that makes any sense. It's large enough to have economic stability and inertia, but not so large that a relatively small number of wealthy people can disenfranchise the majority of the citizens. And that's a bit unclear, but I think that kind of part of my motivation for being a part of this is that American democracy has just become too big.
Yeah. Well, I can let me speak to this at this level. There's no fucking way in high hell that any one single person can be expected to have the kind of conscious understanding that it would take to lead a country. How big is the United States?
349 million, I think.
3.4 billion?
No, 349 million.
349 million. Okay. There's 349 million people. And then there's one guy that's ostensibly supposed to represent them. Uh, how can any person be that psychic? I mean, just I mean, the mind that would be able to encapsulate that many disparate groups of people all at once, and the number of people that would have to keep track of every single piece of detail, it's mind-boggling. The disconnect of information, if you get what I'm saying. In other words, it's just ridiculous. It's like being captain of the world, or why not just captain of the galaxy while we're at it. It's just, there's too much data for a person or even a small body of people to keep track of. There's just too many people. You see what I mean? So you have to break it down to a more consumable unit, something that kind of the how should I put it? I see you, you see me, kind of an idea. In other words, there is this kind of antiquated notion in our modern election systems that you nominate people. And the idea of nomination is that, there's some guy, him, he's a good guy. Let's have him run for office. How is that even a hope of possibility for offices like president or Senate or any of these loftier positions that you would ever even have heard of the person before they ran?
At this point, it seems to be reality TV shows. If you get on a reality show and you just cameras broadcasting your life, and enough people watch it and say, "Oh yeah, give me more of that guy."
Yeah,
and that seems to be what's happening with Trump. That's, I think, for a guy as wealthy as him to take a job that pays $400,000 a year, I don't think that's his actual goal. I think his real goal is the reality show that he does after he gets out of the White House. It's becoming a farce.
Sorry, I think that was the whole plan. I think the whole point, really, of the presidency for Donald Trump, it was all about the stakes to begin with. Trump brand stakes. All right, getting that marketing. We can reform immigration, and don't forget about the steaks. They're delicious, people.
Mm-hmm.
The simple fact of the matter is, I mean, that's what we're stuck with. We're stuck with Kim Kardashian, whoever won an Olympic gold medal next year, and next we'll be voting for Pepsi Cola for the White House. Just anything that's recognizable.
Right. I mean, the idea that I like. I mean, from my perspective, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West are basically the royal couple of California. Like, if we were to become a monarchy, we could just set them as the royal family and like arrange the rest of the democracy around them.
Yeah.
I think they are, they have the same kind of, social weight that the House of Windsor does in England.
So you're down with Kim 2020, huh?
Oh no, I don't think they should be elected. I just think they should just be kind of like the reference point for the culture.
Oh, why can't we elect them at this point? I mean, how much lower can we go? Throw them in there. Let's see what happens.
Right. No, it's kind of the lowest common denominator effect, which is something that I think democracy is kind of known for, especially in the first past the post system that America has. But I think what Trump is talking about does represent the lowest common denominator for a broad swath of the American public. And it is the result of an antiquated system. The whole idea of the Electoral College was when, before the telegraph, you had to have people get on their horses and ride to Philadelphia to cast a vote for president. And now that system has become perverted in a way where California gets has I don't know the statistics offhand, but is badly underrepresented in the federal system.
I forget what the per capita ratio was, but it was gross. Basically, the point is if you move to Delaware, your voting power like tripled. I think that's how it goes. Something reasonable around there. But it boils down to it. It's just simply too big. I mean, the spread is gigantic. It's like, and when you get that many people, you try to clump them all together. What do people have in common at that kind of vastness? I mean, they have nothing but the lowest common denominator. There is the phrase, common denominator. So what? They eat. They go to the bathroom. They wear clothes. I mean, these are very like, they respond to fear. They respond to
It's
sugar and sex and just the base, because that's what happens when you take 2 billion people. What do they all have in common? What? Eyes, nose, mouth. It's like,
And I think you're onto something with the steaks. I work in agriculture. I work in vegetables, but that is kind of the consensus that the American public has delivered to the USDA is make beef cheap. So most of the Midwest, they grow corn and soybeans to feed the animals
yeah,
because everybody wants to eat more meat. And that's it's an example that there's pros and cons to it. Increasingly, people are seeing the cons, but that's like when people get to make demands of the government, that's the thing that makes them happy. That's if nobody is probably going to get elected on a platform of I'm going to make beef more expensive.
yeah. Well, exactly. It's like you take any individual person. It's a nuanced, well-rounded opinion based on a point of view that comes from their life and their situation, and kind of a local sphere of action. Right? There's factors and there's forces within this little bubble radius around them that help them make decisions, and it's complex. And then when you start to group that in, go to the mean, and group that in, go to the mean, and group that in, go to the mean, and group that in, go to the mean, by the time you're done, yeah, it's like, I like meat, it tastes good, salt and fat are fun. It's just, nothing. Not even like, what's your favorite kind? How do you like to cook it? Like, nothing. Just, no, meat, flesh, run it. Put it on a plate. Don't care. Steamed, boiled, or barbecued. Just bring it.
Right. It's idiocracy is
Yeah,
becoming more and more prescient with every passing year, I think.
yeah. Well,
So
that's why the movie's funny.
right, yeah. So when I met you at the anti-Trump rally at outside the Federal Building, something that I noticed is that you were going back and forth and talking to the people on both sides, to the Trumpies and to the independent California folks, which is
Yeah,
something that I try to do also. And I think that's important, as we build consensus around independence to try to find a common denominator, to kind of move beyond what's the lowest common denominator where they're afraid of Mexicans and we like
yeah,
Mexicans. What's the touchstone with that? Because even though Republicans don't have any statewide offices in California, Trump still got 30% of the vote here. And as we move towards an independence initiative and a vote on independence, we're going to need a lot of those people on board with the program.
yeah.
So, I guess what do you have in common with the Make America Great Again contingent?
I mean, what do I have with those people? Frame the question a little bit, because let's not let's not boil people down to the mean. Which people would you mean? Give me like a prototype person.
So let's see if I can a person who I'm just thinking of an individual who is standing on that corner wearing a Make America Great Again hat with a Second Amendment shirt on, or say a Don't Tread on Me shirt on with a Second Amendment, who wants to be able to have a concealed carry permit and doesn't and wants a border wall to be built. How do you what do you say to that person?
What do I say to them? Well, I probably would just basically say that you could live the way you want to live, and I could live the way I want to live, as long as we're willing to respect the idea of domain, which is that things work for you where you are, and things work for me where I am. You see what I mean? Kind of how should I put it? Like, well, for example, just at that rally, a lot of those people are not from California. They had to be bussed in because there is not a lot of people in California who are going to show up to a MGTOW rally at the drop of a hat and run down there and scream. So they had to kind of be bussed in and have their red wave in California or whatever it is. But what did we talk? What did I talk about with them? I talked how their YouTube channel was going. I talked about one guy. We had a long conversation about his sons, and that was strange. I talked very little politics. I mean, ultimately, I talked to one guy about politics, and what we talked about immigration, and we basically came to an agreement that the immigration lottery that currently exists in the federal system, there needed to be more of that. There needed to be more winning tickets.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What would you?
that's actually what we discussed, because ultimately everybody knew what was going to happen. At the end of the rally, everybody was going to go home, and at home, they they have an arrangement that works well for them. And you see what I mean? So, in other words, it's just how should I put it? It's just some magical idea that the sense of like neighborliness ends at some point, or somehow or another, my life by symbolism is intruding into your life symbolically somewhere out in Missouri or Wisconsin or something. My life here in California is drastically affecting yours. I mean, that's kind of where this imaginary divide starts to exist. So, do we have anything? Does this movement, have anything for those 33 Trump voters? And yes, which is we have good fiscal policy, and we have good tax sense, and we have benefits for taxes spent. Things I think those people would enjoy. We also have opportunities for water infrastructure, and basically better energy grids. Like, those people benefit from wind energy. Most of these people are in the east of the state, over closer around, kind of centered around Reno. So a lot are in the Central Valley, and a lot of them are in San Bernardino. So kind of think of the more outskirts. It's really quite simply the rural area, and then other places like Modoc. So smart grids benefit these people. It lowers their electricity costs. Their power consumptions are gigantic because because of lack of concentration, which is whenever you don't live in a city, you use a lot more power. It's just,
Sure.
a requirement.
Yeah, the carbon footprint of a suburban resident is much more than that of an urban resident, and that's something that that
Hold
has
on,
to
let
be
me just turn off
addressed
this
on
fan.
a
I'm
large
having a little
scale.
trouble hearing. There we go. That's better. Sorry, go ahead.
So I was saying that, yeah, the energy needs and the carbon footprint of a suburban resident is much higher than that of an urban resident, and that's something that really needs to be addressed as we move forward and we make strides to combat climate change. And that's something that, again, I think California has a consensus that's quite different from the rest of America. I think most of California recognizes that, well, most of California lives within probably 40 miles of the coast. And so the idea of, sea level rise displacing millions of people is much more real here than it is in, Utah or Ohio or so on. And that's something that, can't, the American government is not going to do anything meaningful about, because it doesn't affect most Americans. I mean, there are population centers on the East Coast, but they're not at the same kind of existential danger that I think California's big cities are. So that's like one of the big issues for me to drive this, and to say California needs to be leading the world in terms of addressing climate change. That I think is one of the top issues why I am pursuing this goal.
Well, aren't we? We are leading the world, aren't we? Or has Germany got us?
That's, as far as the energy mix, that's an interesting question. California is off coal for electrical production, which is a huge achievement. Berkeley
I
is
wouldn't say
just.
that's much of an achievement, because we just swapped it out for natural gas, which we have a ton of.
It's true. It's true. I think natural gas is marginally cleaner. I think it's probably significantly cleaner. But yeah,
Well,
that's
it
the next one to
produces
have
less
to
NOx fumes, and it produces less sulfates for acid rain, but it produces exactly the same. There's no escaping the law of thermodynamics, which is that you're going to get a certain percentage of carbon dioxide for every hydrocarbon burned. And what is it? So that's 2 water, 1 carbon dioxide for every molecule of methane.
You get the 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens. Yeah, so two waters, yeah, and the CO2.
Right.
Um, so yeah, but I think the extraction in process for natural gas is less energy intensive. You know, to extract a barrel of oil, for example, takes there's more and more hydrocarbons going into the process of extracting new hydrocarbons out. So there's the net energy gain becomes smaller. Whereas with natural gas, if once you find a vein, you know it's light enough that it just expands out of the ground, and I think it's a more efficient extraction technology, I believe. But
You
yeah,
make
it's the
no,
next one
no,
that
no.
needs to
You
be.
make an excellent point with that. Yeah, the fractioning hydrocarbons is crazy energy intensive. I mean,
Right.
you're what are you? I think what is your? It's like 12% loss per barrel to fractionate it to get the constituents
Could
or
be, could
refinery,
be.
the
Yeah,
refining process.
yeah. The refining process is hugely energy intensive. So I mean, I think that on a practical level, on a policy level, what does that mean for California? And I think it means promoting things like high speed rail, like promoting public transit, promoting urban density. So, like in California, in Berkeley recently, there was this ruling that new construction could not have natural gas heating unless the new construction is more than 4 stories. So it's kind of a carrot and a carrot and stick approach. That if you want to build something that's low density, then you're not able to include a natural gas line. If you build something that's high density, at this point they're saying, okay, in that case, you can have natural gas.
Who did this come out of?
Berkeley City Council, I believe.
Okay, it's a good idea. So, all right. Well, you know, I don't think we. The truth of the matter is, at a policy level, even at the California level, the idea of getting into new urbanism is not a necessity. Even though I'm a strong proponent of new urbanism, um, because all that. The truth of the matter is, the silver bullet here is sodium thermal batteries, which
Okay.
actually work. They, if you can build them in large scale, it's semi-proven technology. The part that hasn't been proven is the scale.
So this, if I could just explain for what I understand for a minute. So you have basically a stake that has a ball of sodium metal on it, and then you have an array of hundreds of mirrors that are all focusing solar energy on that ball so that the sodium actually melts, and then it
No,
goes.
no,
Okay.
no. Yeah, you could form a eutectic alloy of sodium and potassium, which will drop its melting temperature down to like 220 C. So, and that eutectic alloy is highly reactive, like crazy highly reactive. So, I forget what the anode is that they're using right now. It's been about 4 months since I reviewed the material.
Hmm.
But essentially, what it boils down to is as long as you can keep the thing hot, you have like a 96% efficiency round trip as long as you can keep the thing hot. It's heated by Joule's heating, Coulombic heating.
I don't know the physics that well, but I think one of the advantages is that it can capture solar energy during the day and then use it to produce electricity at night when the demand is higher.
Yeah, it's basically similar concept. Is it captures electricity during the day and then releases it at night when the wind's not blowing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really just about the scale. It's about building these things the size of dams, massive sizes.
Mm-hmm.
So the battery itself is pretty simple. It's sodium eutectic alloy. I wish I could remember what the anode is, but I cannot remember. Um, and it's wrapped in a highly insulated ceramic container that's under pressure with two electrodes sticking out. So it looks like it looks like a brick. It looks like a white brick.
Hmm.
And if you have to charge and discharge it periodically to keep it hot. It loses heat very slowly. The action of charging and discharging it is what keeps it warm. If you've studied any lithium batteries, you'll know that the major dilemma of lithium batteries is discharge and charge rate, which creates all the heat. So this thing benefits from that. So
Mm-hmm.
high discharge rates, high recharge rates are a positive.
Okay.
So, and then you just have to figure out how to build the volume, because, the one I saw was about the size of a brick, so we would have to build units about the size of shipping containers
Mm-hmm.
and then stack them on each other to kind of get the capacity. But this seems to be the maturing technology to replace the next best option, which is just refilling hydroelectric dams, pumping back, which is at 80%.
Interesting. Okay, so we've been talking for half an hour now, and I'm trying to avoid getting so much material that I can't edit it into usable chunks. So I think that's probably plenty for now. Is there anything else that you wanna add for today?
Well, I remember were wanting to discuss localism.
Oh, sure. Right. Uh, so the doctrine of local control, as I understand it, it kind of is the idea that decisions are made are inherently better when they're made at the lowest possible level, and I think
That's not exactly true.
okay. Well then, do tell.
It's not the decisions, because decisions means you have to choose a decider, and then a decider has a quality. And then how qualified are their decisions? The question is how good is the information that they're making those decisions on? And the answer to the question is the information is always of higher quality at a local level. In other words, how should I put it? You're standing in front of a nuclear power plant. You're not a nuclear physicist. You don't have a clue how that thing works. But you're staring at it and you're going, I don't think it's supposed to be shooting a big plume of smoke into the sky. So you get on the phone and you call a nuclear physicist at, I don't know, some kind of county control board, and you say, hey, the reactor's shooting a plume of smoke into the sky. I think that's bad. And they go, that's not true. And you go, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, that's impossible. There's no way the reactor could do that. And you go, well, it's doing it. And that's a perfect example. The guy on the phone is not there in front of the reactor, so it's unbelievable to him. The guy standing in front of the reactor doesn't know anything, but he knows it's not supposed to be shooting a pillar of smoke.
Yeah, I think that that's a possibility, but I think more commonly what happens is that a hub that's in charge of monitoring all of the nuclear power plants has stress meters, and because information can flow so freely and so fastly now, that kind of monitoring station will have the ability to see impending signs of failure long before a person standing outside just watching with their eyes can. And I think that it's the localism that you're talking about is kind of it's described as it doesn't take into account how human activity changes with scale. So I mean, the idea that a democracy of 350 million is too big to be ruled by a single executive. It doesn't follow that everyone should therefore have their own little fiefdom, and we shouldn't have any kind of coordination at all. I think we can, through a process of trial and error, say, okay, this is the size unit that we should have.
You're talking about the problem of
kind of policies and so on.
No, I get your problem. You're basically taking it to the irrational extreme, which is good. That's the way we test theories. So the theory holds true. Even with cameras, someone who lives next door to a nuclear power plant is going to have more information than a controller who monitors several nuclear power plants. There really isn't a violation of the quality of information, which is obviously the closer you are and the more contact and the more day-to-day contact you have with a source of information, the better the quality of that information is going to be. So you can talk about cameras and the internet and all sorts of other sensing technology that may exist, but it won't have the same quality of heuristics that comes from long-term intimate contact. It's just the only way to replace long-term intimate contact is to kind of basically have a person move there. The only way the controller and the guy living next door would have the same quality of information is for the controller to literally move there. So that is a point about information, not about policy, not about control, not about expertise. It's just about the quality of information.
Right. I mean, I think so. What that puts me in mind of, we were talking a little bit earlier about the idea of new urbanism, and there's this idea that cities are the economic engines of any society. That's where things happen with the greatest efficiency. And one idea why is that in a city you have a large number of weak connections. So you're probably never more than two steps away from finding a person with the good or the service that you need to purchase to be an efficient economic actor.
Right.
Because you have a broader, social network, you probably know some. If you don't know the person who knows the thing, then you know the person who knows the person who knows the thing. Where in a rural environment, you rapidly run out of network. And so I
Right.
think there are applications of that. But then you come into the question of what's the optimal size for a city. Los Angeles is 15 million, and it has some issues that cities of 5 million do not have. I mean, it definitely has a ton of culture and economic mass and all that. But the traffic is a problem. The pollution is a problem. Social services is a problem. And I wonder how much of that is not due maybe to a failure or a shortcoming of governance. How much of it is just an inherent property of having 10 million people or 15 million people live in one unit. So it's kind of it's speaking to a different facet of the same question of what's the optimal size for a human network. And I
All
think
right.
that
So
question is different for a city, it's different for a country, it's different for a family. And a lot of this traces back to this work by a guy named Robin Dunbar, who looked
okay.
at. You're familiar with Dunbar's number?
Yeah. What was it? 500.
About 180. So that
100.
was
Oh, it was
180.
180.
So yeah, and kind of these primitive pre-government tribal landscapes where you have basically a big man calling the shots for a social unit. The maximum size seems to be about 180, and that's true in New Guinea. It's true in Africa. It's true in Mongolian steppes. And his idea was that there's something fundamental, perhaps in the neural hardware of humans, where that's the size of a social network where each person can know each other person in the network. And beyond that, you have to have a more formal organizational structure. And that's something that militaries have found over time too, is that 200 is a number of soldiers that can be effectively commanded by a single commanding officer. Above that, you have to have battalions or regiments or so on. I don't know the theory, but something
Yeah.
about that there's qualities inherent to certain sized groups of humans that is independent of whether you believe in God or socialism or some mix of the
No,
two or
it's just a
whatever.
function of the 80-20 rule.
It,
It's a function of the 80-20 rule, which is you only have so much free attention during the day to concern yourself or keep track of the habituations and the personal attitudes of so many people. You get what I mean? After that, it's going to start to become inefficient.
right. Yeah. No, that's absolutely the case. And inefficiency is not the boogeyman. Efficiency is not the highest and best goal of mankind, I think, but it is a useful metric to look at. How well is this system working? Should we change it? How and why should we change it?
Well, I mean, there is ways to increase efficiency, and that's kind of where culture comes into play a lot, because that acts as a shorthand. It's also where language comes into play. That is a much larger. That's an efficiency booster right there. These act because basically what it does is it kind of allows you to assess character before having to get to know someone, which just leads to a faster setup. So, how should I put it? That's kind of it. Basically boils down to there is an efficiency increase in sense of place, but that only has a marginal impact. If you're talking about commanding a military unit, you could see obviously that there's a slight bump up to 200, and the reason why is because they're all in the military, so there's an expected code of conduct. They've all read the same book,
Right.
and they
Yeah.
all know how to act like soldiers. prescribably so. But so it becomes slightly more optimal. But yes, of course, every soldier is going to interpret that a little bit differently. They're all going to have their quirks and peccadillos, and so a commanding officer maybe is still going to be limited to about 200. So what's the optimal group size? I probably would say in a range. If I was going to put it into a range, I'd say a range between 100 and 400. That would be a small catalog number. For example, I live in a place called Arleta. Arleta is about the right distance and the right population density to operate as a tribe, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, compared to the city of Los Angeles, I think like maybe an 800th of the total land area. So it's not a large place at all. And the way the city has gone about trying to deal with this problem is to create an artifice called a neighborhood council. And the purpose of the neighborhood council is to essentially act as a polling station for the city council, the actual central city. So the idea is that every month, a representative from the city council comes down and asks the neighborhood council, how's things going? What do you think? Law enforcement comes and speaks to the council. It's a little slipshod, but you can see the idea is to try to get a more local reaction to city council planning, because city council is starting to realize that the city's a little vast and wide and disparate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and I think it probably makes some decisions can be made more efficiently about land use, perhaps some aspects of law enforcement and so on. But I think and the example that keeps coming up for me is healthcare. If you're going to have universal healthcare, I don't think it's reasonable to have every county independently having their own MRI system and so on. I think at that point a statewide network of healthcare makes a lot more sense. And I think the local control idea becomes less valuable when you're talking about that kind of an essential social service. And I think that's a unique example, but it's not necessarily a unique example, but it's something that there's a lot of functions of the state of society that are more like healthcare, and that having it spread over a group of communities, a network of communities, makes sense from a lot of economic and administrative reasons. So I guess the question would be, what does local control or localism have to say about universal health care?
What would localism have to say about universal health care? Well, kind of my first point would be that MRI machines need to become cheaper, and that can be done. So the second thing, because obviously if you have to cart around this big machine on a truck to every little city every time they need an MRI, that's inefficient. Or having people truck long distances to get an MRI, that's also inefficient. So you're going to need more machines either way you slice it. More people, more machines. There's no real way out of that problem. As for should Arleta be building its own MRI machine with its own little factory? Yes, if it were possible, but probably no, because there's just simply the expertise is too rare. So that means one group of experts will have to build the MRI machines for all people involved. So in other words, it's preferable that they build their own, just like it's preferable that you get vegetables from your own community. But it's not necessary, because the point is the construction of localism is not, in a sense, you seem to be confounding localism and political power, home rule, or some kind of how should I put it? There is a thing atypical to kind of a systematic approach to politics is the idea of consultation, informed consent. Basically, that a larger government entity provides information that is of value to smaller government entities so that they can make a decision. The idea of having smaller government entities do it is that their decision will be specific to the concerns of their needs and be more accurate, not higher, not more informed, more accurate. You see, you have to understand that the fundamental point of localism is the accuracy. When you ask the local people for a custom solution for their local problem, it's always much more accurate. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to involve resources that need to be controlled or concerned by a larger government entity. It just means that the solution that goes into place is appropriate for that location.
Right, and I guess I like to I'm going to keep talking about healthcare for a moment. So in that case, let's say the information is the price of prescription drugs, where the state of California tells Arleta, okay, this is the price that your clinic is going to pay for these life-saving medications and these procedures. And they tell the same information, the same prices to every other community and county in the state of California. My belief is that that's going to be much more cost effective than having each community negotiate their prices independently with the drug manufacturers and with the hospitals. Because, at present we have this problem where Americans pay much more for every drug and every procedure than any other country in the world. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but how do you address it? And I don't think that localism does address it. I guess my point, from my perspective,
localism could address that, actually.
Address what I see as the problems with modern society.
All right, so localism would address that very well, because it would basically create, instead of having one client, one producer, you're having one producer, possibly two or three, and you have, I don't know if we go on a county level, what does that lead us to? Something like 102? I believe there's about 102 counties.
Yeah, 89, somewhere about 100. Yeah.
Okay, so 89. I like that number. That's good. My numbers are always suck. I usually need a list, but I never have them. So every county individually negotiating with the drug company might actually work out better. Because if some county could figure out how to get a better price, then every other county will want to copy that. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, it creates a competition and creates a drive to figure out how to get the prices lower amongst counties. And while at the higher level, there might be one individual doing the buying or negotiating the deal, well, then that drug company has to repeat that negotiation process 89 times more. And out of that 89 times more, there's a possibility that one of those counties can manage to get the price lower. If one of them gets the price lower, then the others will want to follow suit. They'll want the same deal. You understand? In other words, it creates a competitive environment that drives the price down. Whereas if you have a single negotiation point, there's one point of corruption. So you can create a back-end deal if you can get to that one negotiator. There's one point of information flow, so it's only that one person, their office, their strategic understanding that knows what's going on. Everybody else is excluded from the process, so any other test cases or bright ideas may not work or may not be available to try because there's only one shot. Because in other words, everything's only happening once, whereas when you make it repetitive, it has an evolutionary function. By making this negotiation happen 89 times, there's the possibility that it could work out better. There's also the possibility it could work out worse, but that's unlikely because, why would San Bernardino be willing to accept a much worse deal than Fresno got? Assuming that the counties talk to each other about their deal.
Right. Assuming that, and also assuming that the drug company also doesn't learn in the meantime how to corrupt each individual county. I think it takes less money to corrupt the county of Lassen than it would to corrupt the state of California. I'd like to hope. And also, I think the state, because of its economic mass, can say to any one drug company, okay, if you want to do business with our 39 million, potential customers, you need to give us, a good rate. So I think
Right.
just the economic mass and the the economy of scale that comes along with that, I think creates efficiency.
So for drugs in particular, you make an excellent point in general, but for drugs in particular, this is a bad argument because drugs are absolutely cheap to manufacture. They're unbelievably inexpensive to produce. To research them is incredibly expensive, but the actual production is pennies.
Mm-hmm.
So most of it is return on investment. That's where all the money goes to. So kind of the floor's the limit as far as drugs go. But I get your point between erosive purchasing or block purchasing.
I will
Price.
need to look that up. Okay, so we are at 51 minutes now. I think we've had a good talk. I need to keep this a usable size, because otherwise the editing just winds up taking 3 times as long as the interview did. So I think I'm gonna call that a good amount of information for today. I'd like to thank you very much for participating.
Fine. Do you want to talk some more off camera?
Yeah, sure. Let me stop recording, and then you have any last words?
What was that?
Do you have any last things you want to add before the camera stops?
No, I'm pretty good. I'm enjoying this. I like this conversation.